Okay, good evening everyone. And today what I want to talk about, I have a guest called Thad, who's very social in my opinion. And what I really want to discuss with him is a lot of us are very introverted or antisocial, and we get scared to even make friends or talk to people. And when you want to improve on your public speaking skills, the fundamental currency is being social. And a lot of us are even scared to talk to one person, leave alone talking to a room of people. So we're going to get some tips and tricks into someone who's just loves talking. It's sometimes very difficult to shut him up sometimes, and get a sense of what it is to be from someone who's pretty introverted, and how someone can improve on themselves so that they become like Thad. Thad, give us some tips and tricks for someone who's not very social. How would you help them into saying, hey, you know what? Being yourself is not a good idea for someone like them, because being themselves is being introverted. But how could you give them tips and tricks or ideas so that they can eventually start to interact with people and improve on their social circle?
That's a brilliant question, Anthony. I would say when an introvert has to possibly convert and become an extrovert, that is such a grandiose task for them. But you know what? If you break things down into bite-sized pieces, it's quite simple. I like to relate this as a story, because that's what Toastmasters is all about. Public speaking and becoming an extrovert, it's like dating. It's like asking a person out on a first date. That is one of the most difficult things to do. And that's almost, if you take that and use that as an analogy, you're asking your audience out on the first date. And I think if you're going to ask somebody out on a first date, you got to be amusing. You got to be a little bit out of character and engaging. And how do you be engaging? You talk about something that you feel comfortable speaking about. And that one thing, as seasoned Toastmasters would say, is yourself. Because that's one way of converting from an introvert to an extrovert, is by talking about a subject which you have confidence in. And when you talk about yourself, that is one of the most easiest. Of course, if you are still finding yourself, that might be a challenge. Exactly. But most people do.
And that was my next question, because a lot of people, you ask people to talk about themselves, and you ask them, so what do you do? And I work. And it's just a one-syllable answer. And they can express more, but they're almost having a tension of expressing themselves, and they do not know quite how to do that. Or make the conversation engaging. And you gave points where someone who's social would be like, oh, of course I can make my conversation engaging. Oh, I can talk about myself in so many different dimensions and ways. But someone who's not used to talking, what would you have to tell them? How would they need to elaborate more about themselves?
That's actually the second interesting question you posed to me tonight. I believe to come up with good content, let me use another analogy. If you go to the doctor and you just tell him, I got a pain in my stomach, that's not really telling him the full story. But if you tell him that I've got some pain at the side, and I got a little bit of indigestion, and I got a little bit of a runny nose going, then he gets the full picture. That's what you have to do in a speech. You have to start talking about different things and using a little bit of, I would say a couple of descriptors. So if you describe a situation, you just don't say, oh, the guy got up and he smacked him on the face. No, the guy got up and he was furious, and you should have seen the look in his eyes. So that's an example of
adding variety, adjectives to your conversation.
Yeah.
And making it,
that's the first part.
Yeah.
That's the first part. The second part to it is using strategic pauses, pausing between those ideas. The third part to that is using vocal variety. For example, my mother told me when I was really young that I should lower my voice. And what did I do? I lowered my voice. I'm getting descriptive. I'm using vocal variety. The other part to this is when you do deliver a speech for the first time and you want to appear to be an extrovert, is whatever you say, you've got to say it with passion. So for example, just counting 1 to 10. If you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's really lacking emotion and passion. But if you do it this way, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You see that you've got some emotion going there.
And it gets me to the second point, or understanding how most social people are. It's not that they're always 24/7 social. We always are not, not going to get up and just start talking, which means that you build up gradually throughout the day, to build up your momentum. And it's more like, motion creates emotion. So when you're like saying these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 with passion, you're moving your body, you're getting your mind and your body to, move, and that's creating more energy in it, and eventually you become more engaging. So that would be a pretty interesting thing. So for most introverts, they're like very stiff and they're very, quiet and they don't want to talk. A lot of it is just shaking up and speaking loudly, I would say, just to push out such a comfort zone. Because speaking loud, most people are scared to even speak loud in normal settings. What would you say? Because I know you're loud and clear, but a lot of many times you hear people and like, I didn't hear what they said. And how do you make sure? Because that's also like kind of like a fear people have, speaking loudly, because they don't want to be heard or they don't want other people to hear them.
Well, if you're talking about speaking loudly versus speaking clearly, those are two separate things. If you want to really project your voice, when I went to acting school as a kid, my director would sit in the back of the room, and he would say that I had to project my voice to that person right at the back. And if that person at the back cannot hear me, then that's a problem. But that's the volume. But if you're talking about pronunciation, the way I worked on my pronunciation, because, English is my, fifth language, I used to watch the BBC. And BBC announcers, I don't know what they do, but Britain is a country with multiple accents. They would get people who had very, very clear diction.
Says the Indian.
Yeah, very clear diction. So I would watch them present, and I would see how they would move their mouth, and they would pronounce each syllable, each sound so clearly, and they would say it slowly and with precision. And that's why I guess I've learned how to mimic accents, because I've seen how people pronounce words. If you slow it down and put it into slow motion, then you start to see how they open their mouths for certain vowels and for certain consonants. And this is something that is typically taught at school, how to pronounce. And people forget about that when they're delivering speeches, and that affects the way in which speeches are received.
So really what I understand from this, in order for you to actually be social, it's almost as if you're trying to say that we got to be a good communicator. And being good in communication is speaking clearly, putting your ideas out there so people understand what you're saying. It's not about speaking loudly necessarily, but if being clear requires you to speak loud, then you should be speaking loudly. And not to mention, if you need to enunciate every word, pronunciation is critical, which something I don't have, and I'm trying to learn myself. So to conclude on this conversation, if we had to give it in 3 points, someone who's like, oh my God, I do not know how to even get into a setting and say I want to join a public speaking event or any event, I don't know what to do because I'm so scared. I'd rather sit in my house. 3 steps for them to get out of their house and start meeting people, turning from a complete introvert to start becoming social.
All right, the first thing I would do is pick a topic that you're most confident in. Yourself, your hobbies, something that you know really, really well. Maybe you want to talk about your family members. So picking that topic which you're confident on is important. The second thing is to be able to use clear diction and pronunciation when you're speaking. That's really critical. And I think the third most important thing is to use strategic pauses between ideas. Because if you roll out all of the information and ideas too quickly, I feel that if you don't have pauses, it will prevent you from being able to effectively communicate those ideas to your audience. So those are my 3 nuggets.
To conclude, and I actually have one more question. What if your first language is not English, and then you can't speak clearly just because you're not used to speaking in that language clearly? And most people are even scared to go and communicate with some other cultures just because they're like, I don't know the language. And I think a lot of our members in Toastmasters have that language barrier. So if you put being enunciation and pronunciation as one of the critical factors in just going out there, wouldn't that be more, oh my God, I don't know, how do I speak properly when it's not my first language?
That's actually a very interesting question. Before I actually arrived in Vancouver, I used to teach English in Hong Kong. And all those little children had this very same problem. It wasn't their first language. They struggled, and they struggled with confidence in speaking. So what's really important when you're not confident in a language, and I guess it comes naturally, is to slow it down. There's no rush. Slow it down, express your ideas slowly. Just talk as if it's a normal conversation, but go slow. Go slow at first, and when you go slow at first, at least they can utter some words and they can utter it confidently. Because if you go too fast, what's going to happen is they're going to have brain freeze. They're going to forget what they're going to say because they don't yet know how to form grammatically proper sentences. And I think by going slowly, that helps them to pace themselves and to give them enough time to think about what they're going to say next. So I think from that experience of teaching children in a foreign country, that was one of the things I advised them to do, was to control the pace and go a bit slow at first before they gained experience to speak quicker and more confidently.
Thank you, Tad, for your valuable tips. And if you really want to go from introvert to extrovert, follow these 3 steps. Thank you.